Hello, dear listeners. I hope you're doing well on this beautiful Wednesday. I'm doing fantastic. Today we have a collection of 6 ghost/apparition stories. I'm not sure how I'm going to title it. Just know that it's a collection of ghost and apparition stories. So paranormal style stuff. That's pretty much what it is. Yeah, I really don't have much else to say. I kind of said a lot of things already in my intros, so really just here it is. 6 paranormal ghost apparition stories for your enjoyment. Enjoy. There was one ordinary random night that I remember in detail when I was about 13 years old. It was like any other school night, going to bed around 8 or 9 p.m. in my room alone. I hadn't yet fallen asleep because I had the habit of listening to music while or right before actually sleeping, so my earbuds were in full effect. As I lay in my bed, I am facing the wall with my door to the backside. I just felt something. It was almost like that feeling you get when someone is staring at you and you can feel it. I was in bed for 5 minutes or so, and already my younger brothers, who are 1 and 2 years younger than me, are annoying me, I thought. I turn around and there she was. An almost see-through, white, floaty, blurry silhouette of a lady with no legs. She was floating and holding a baby with its head covered under a blanket. I could not see her face clearly, and she just stood there, not really looking at me, but past me, if that makes sense. I only looked at her for a few seconds, frozen. I rubbed my eyes really fast with my blanket and sat up ready to scream, but when I looked again, she'd vanished. I haven't seen anything like it since. Has anyone gone through anything similar? This next story is laid out kind of in an interesting way. It's titled Me and My Mom's Dreams About a House We Lived In, and it's set up with each experience being its own section, so I'll read it as such. Real life. So in this house, I saw people from the Civil War era. I had dreams of the war and the carnage as well, as one time I saw an entity who looked like my mom. We moved out when I was 5 or 6, and my mom, me, and my grandma all lived there. Dream number 1. So this was about 8 months ago. I had a dream that me and 2 friends went to a house that I used to live in to see if we could find some stuff that was left behind in the move. Keep in mind, this house was built pre-Civil War and used as a makeshift hospital during the battle that had occurred there. When we moved out, the bank took ownership of the house from my uncle, who we were renting it from as he took the back off trying to fix the foundation. So anyway, we go to the back, and the house looks how I last saw it, with the back torn off and the patio gone. We go to where it was torn off, and instantly the house was back to how it was when I was a kid. When we go in, we start having paranormal experiences, and demons are everywhere. Something that looked like my mom tormented us, and the house kept going between how it was when I was a kid to dilapidated with the back off, and then back to pristine condition, like what it may have looked like when the day it was built. I take a small box of my grandma's and leave, and when I get home, the stuff from the house had followed me home. I find out that a demon has bound itself to my grandma's box, and then I typically wake up. Dream number 2. I have what I can only assume is a time slip, and am in said house during a house party in the late 1800s. It's a semi-formal dinner party. Dream number 3. It starts in first person, and I go through a cattle gate from the woods onto a dirt road. I walk up to a house. It's a small 2-story country-style home that has an identical color scheme to the real-life house I used to live in from Dream 1. It looks like a different version of that same house. It is around 5 or 6 p.m. in the country, in a rural place, and it's in the spring or summer as all the trees are full of leaves and there is a thick vegetation. I go into a third-person view and see myself opening the door and knowing I'm in the middle of restoring the house and the house is mine. I never see inside the house, and the dream has happened twice within a week, the second time happening directly after dream number 2, like dream 2 cut and then immediately this dream started again. It's the exact same dream both times. So today my mom had a dream about a house similar to mine. What would this even be an example of? Is it a haunting or what? P.S. House has been torn down since 2015 or 2016. This was at my last house. I was really interested in meditation, still am, And I did a lot of them there, some guided, some not. After some time, I started noticing things. Things like shadow people, strange lucid dreams, unexplained noises, and an unexplained small entity I saw once in between a cracked door. The shadow people were okay. I mean, they startled me at first, but they weren't doing anything to me, so I just ignored them. Most were adult size, however one was child-sized. I tended to lucid dream anyways, but these ones were odd. There were 3 voices, all male. One was very deep, one was calm and friendly, and the last was, well, crazy. It always laughed. I would be laying down in my bed, and they'd be talking above me, but I could never see them, just the room and myself. Another lucid dream I tended to have was somewhat similar. I would be in bed, but this time the voices aren't there. I would feel my body sliding off one way or the other, sometimes right through the bed. I could see a space with stars, if I'd get far enough. It would just be black, and it went through the bed itself. At one point, I was entirely out of my body. I could see myself. It didn't last long, though, because it startled me to the point where I woke up. I haven't experienced this since. The last lucid dream I had during this time also took place in my bed. A lady in white was there in the room with me. She went to the side of my bed, leaned over me, and told me to be careful with what I said and did. She then kissed me on the forehead. I woke up with it tingling and warm. For the unexplained noises, I was almost asleep when I heard the first one. I also saw what made the sound. It was a door. Right after that image passed through my mind, I heard a slamming, loudly. It was so loud, I got up and asked my mother if she had just slammed the door or something. This, however, could be an auditory hallucination. This can happen on the verge of sleep, but I also saw the thing that made the noise right before the noise, so I'm not certain if it was a natural occurrence or not. I also would hear music while I was fully awake. It was really nice music too, classical, with violins, pianos, and the like. I actually loved this and would just listen to it whenever it popped up. I would also smell perfume at times, mostly when I'd first wake up. No one in my house wore perfume except on special occasions. And finally, the unexplained entity. It could have been a dog, if I'm to be honest. We do have a Yorkie about the same size, but what it did wasn't in character for her. I felt like I was being stared at, so I looked at the door, and right in between the crack, I could see something that was small and brown or greenish with large yellow eyes. When it saw me, it disappeared. Our Yorkie would have pushed the door in and ran inside. Peeking in on me isn't what she or any of our dogs would do. So yeah, after we moved, I stopped doing meditations and haven't had a strange or unexplained thing happen to me since. When I was 2 years old, my uncle passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning while working for Stanley Steamer. I had no idea what death was, as I was a toddler. My parents never told me about it, and therefore I had no clue. The night he died, my room filled up with daylight. My backyard was transformed into a big backyard with rolling hills and a red barn off in the distance. I live in an apartment, and there was a golden ladder outside of my window shooting up as far as the eye could see. Then, my Uncle Chad appeared in less than an instant, on the ladder. He was in a white suit and shiny black shoes, and he had this golden glow around him. Something was so serene about it. He told me everything was alright, and to tell my mom that everything was fine, and then proceeded to tell me to look at how beautiful it was, but at that point, I couldn't see anything but him. My mom said she walked in my room because she heard me talking, and I was looking outside the window into the night sky, just saying Jesus over and over and over again. I wasn't raised religious. I had never been to church. We still talk about it to this day, like all the time, trying to make sense of it. So this isn't something I've had hands-on experience with, save for the weird noises and misplaced objects, but stories passed down from my grandparents on my dad's side. My dad's family has been living here in the village for almost 50 years. My country is really small, so it's not uncommon to have your brothers and sisters living on the same street. I live in the Trinidad, which is an island in the Caribbean, and as a people we hold high belief in the paranormal. Our house is located on the corner of an intersection. Keep in mind, this is a village, so there's a back road, and the intersecting road isn't even a road. It's a dusty trail, and there's not much development aside from the actual houses, so the rest of the area is deep foliage. So this story involves my home, the 3 neighbors across from us, 2 right next to each other are brothers, and then there's the house next to ours across the trail, and the house opposite that, and the house behind that one. So it kind of forms a disfigured circle. Long before I was born, and my dad and his sisters were really young, the old lady's husband from across the street got sick and died. Now this is a Hindu family that partook in blood sacrifices and Kali Puja, so it was assumed they did black magic to acquire their wealth, and then when he died, the spirit couldn't leave the earth. My grandmother said every night after his passing, she could hear stuff like dishes and bricks being thrown around and destroyed, but when she went over to see what was wrong, the kitchen was spotless. It was after this occurred a couple times they figured it was his restless spirit and decided to hold the funeral earlier than planned, to lay him to rest. On the night of his funeral, his wife almost died as well, because as she leaned over his coffin, something began choking her and pulling her down into it. They got her out, of course, but then his spirit, or whatever it was, began moving things around. The potted plants rearranged themselves, the chairs stacked together, the doors of the house blew open. Now personally, I would have left and let them deal with that, but because our people are so superstitious, it didn't really affect any of them. So they stayed and continued on with the proceedings. Later, my grandmother would tell me that she had experienced much more paranormal things in her life, so that didn't even faze her. After the funeral, things died down until my grandfather's sister-in-law, who lived in the house across from us, which is now occupied by the son of the restless spirit, started seeing spirits. Specifically, a tall, naked man of African descent. She saw him multiple times, but she was always alone at night when it happened. He would stand in the doorway to her bedroom and just stare at her, and sometimes she'd said there'd be a white coffin floating at the foot of her bed, and he would be laying inside of it. She passed away soon after, without ever resolving the cause of her hallucinations, but I've heard mumblings among the Indian women of our family that it was a symbol, a warning, that her husband was having an affair, but she died without finding out the truth. Then there's the story of the mango tree in the lot to our left. The people who lived there at the time were simply tenants renting from an old woman who allegedly killed her husband in the house and hid his body in an old metal bunker in the backyard. She had a lot of animals in her yard, pigs, chickens, ducks, etc., and so the smell of the feces would cover the stench of her rotting spouse. When anybody asked her about him, she simply said they got a divorce and he went back to England. He was a white man, she was East Indian. And nobody questioned it, because all people would do back in that time was simply gossip about the causes and move on when they got bored. Rumor has it that his body completely decayed in that bunker, and that he continues to haunt the home. And since a new family moved into the house, and customary to Caribbean folk blessed the home before moving in, he couldn't stay in there, and instead occupied the mango tree in the backyard. I was around 6 at this time, and my dad and I would go out and look up at the tree, because there was a large shadowy circle in the middle of it that no matter how much light shone down through the leaves, you couldn't see anything. Now the tree is gone, of course, but it still feels like something lives there because of the ever-present shadow that hovers over that house. Now for my house and the house behind the one across the street. My grandfather's brother lived there. My grandparents always saw apparitions. We have a legend here in the Caribbean about a woman with a foot of a cow called the La Diablesse, or Devil Woman. She's said to be the most beautiful woman ever, and would lure men by stopping them as they drove by to ask for a ride, and she'd always sit in the back seat. When the men arrived to whatever destination she requested, they'd look in the mirror to find that she was gone. Then she would haunt them by appearing in her true form and tormenting them constantly until they took their own lives, or she caused their death in some sort of accident. My grandparents would see this woman roaming the streets with her chains dragging behind her as she seeked out her next victim, and sometimes she'd stare right back at them in the dark of the night. They'd also hear horses running through the trail next to our house, hooves pounding relentlessly, but as soon as they stepped outside to see, they would vanish. There would also be a spirit that would choke my grandfather in his sleep. He'd be thrashing and crying in his sleep, and my grandmother would have to shake him until he woke up. All these things have been happening gradually over the past 40 years. Everyone who marries into the family has also been able to see and hear these paranormal things. I've never had any serious encounters with the paranormal, apart from seeing people in shadows where there are none, and hearing noises that should not be heard. It's never really scared me, maybe because I grew up hearing this story and surrounded by myths and folklore all my life, so it all seems normal. But one thing I can guarantee is that something plagues the village I live in. It's been here for 40 years, and it's still here now. So a little background. I'm in the military, Air Force specifically, and I live on a base in the dormitory. This base is located in the USA. One particular night on a Saturday night, a little over a year ago, at about 1:40ish in the morning, I was relaxing in my dorm when suddenly I get hungry. On weekdays, I worked from midnight to 8 a.m., so I did what I normally did when I get hungry in the middle of the night on a weekend. I hopped in my car and drove to the nearest fast food place open for 24 hours. I grabbed my food and I head back to the base. There I was, across the street from the base. The only thing between me and the gate was a red traffic light. Across the street, I can see a figure make an exchange with the security forces guy, and then the figure proceeds onto base. The light turns green, which prompts me to advance toward the gate. I roll down the window, show the guy my ID, and I drive through. The same figure I saw walk onto base is walking on the sidewalk now. Now, the thing about this base is it's really freaking big. I mean, the guy was on foot. Chances are, it would take 30 minutes, upwards to an hour, to get where he was going. I stopped my car beside him and asked him if he needed a ride. He gladly accepted after stating he lived in a dormitory and entered the back seat of my car. He conveniently lived in the same dormitory I did. We had a mini conversation, but it was pretty normal. He talked about all the places he'd been, and he kept urging me to try to go to Korea for some reason. I talked a little about my job, but never stated how long I lived on base, or anything time-based really. Anyway, we reached the dormitory together. He gets out of the car, and before closing the door, he says, "You only have," and he stated the exact amount of time I had until my enlistment was over. Then the door closes. I take a moment, I'm talking mere seconds here, to do the math in my head. It's not like I'm counting down the days until my enlistment's over. And he was right. I jump out of my car, and to my surprise, he's already gone. Did he sprint to the dorms? I think to myself. I bolt to the dorms myself, only to be greeted by empty corridors. There was no sign of him. Now, who was that guy? Why did he urge me to go to Korea so bad? Most importantly, where did he vanish to? I still think about this from time to time, all the way to this day. I never saw the guy again. Coincidentally, I recently met a girl from Korea. She unfortunately had to go back to Korea, so I'm planning on taking a trip to see her. Not sure if it's related, but it's a thing. So what do you guys think? Who or what was that guy? Am I just crazy, or is this some weird paranormal stuff? Well, there you go, my dear listeners. That was 6 ghost/apparition encounters from Reddit. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up, like it. That really helps me feel good about what I do. Also, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'm really looking forward to my next milestone. Just recently hit 200 not too long ago, so that was pretty awesome. Also, if you would, please leave me a comment. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know what you thought of the video. I would love to hear from you, and I will do my best to reply. All of the sources for these stories are listed down in the description. So all that said, I hope you all have a fantastic day and a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, sleep well.